So hello and thanks for tuning in. My name is Asia Lara and I'm a program manager here at Humanities Washington. We are a nonprofit organization whose mission is to open minds and bridge divides by creating spaces to explore different perspectives. Although we live in a predominantly virtual world today, we would be remiss not to mention the traditional lands that we are participating from. Humanities Washington acknowledges that we present this program from the ancestral homelands of the Coast Salish peoples and acknowledge their continuing connection to this land. Today's discussion will be led by Dr. Tabitha Espina. Born and raised in Guam and having received her PhD from Washington State University, Tabitha is now a postdoctoral associate at Northeastern University and affiliate faculty in their Asian Studies program. Her research interests include Trans-Pacific rhetorics, island feminisms, decolonization, and the public humanities. And without further ado, please take it away, Tabby.
Buenas, everyone. Half a day. Thank you, Asia, for your gracious introduction, as well as all of your work in coordinating this worthwhile and meaningful panel. I am deeply honored to be able to share in conversation with our panelists today, and I appreciate Humanities Washington providing the opportunity and the space for conversations like these that benefit the wider community, especially as it relates to the human experience. And so I do want to provide space and opportunity for our esteemed panelists to introduce themselves to you all. Maybe we'll start with Lehuauakea, sorry.
It's all right, thank you. I'm just so happy to be able to share space, even if it's virtual, with all of you folks. My name is Lehuauakea. I am Kanaka Maoli, or Native Hawaiian, and I'm an artist and cultural practitioner who specializes in bringing back and revitalizing our kapa traditions in Hawaiian culture. And for those who aren't familiar, kapa, or you might know it as tapa in other parts of the Pacific, it's a traditional bark cloth that is pretty much ubiquitous in everyday life. From clothing to bedding, ceremonial purposes. Our babies were born into it and our bones were buried in this cloth as well when we passed on. So I'm working to bring that practice back into my family and my community so it's not nearly lost again. So that's what I do. I'm here based in Seattle now. I know Kapo'e Duwamish. And I'm originally from Pāha'oha'o on the big island of Hawaii. So yeah, mahalo for being here.
Thank you so much.
All right. My full name is Pāha'oha'o Jr. Brandon Fuamatu. I go by Brandon. Feel free to call me Brandon or Pāha'oha'o. I am Samoan Chinese, born and raised in Pāha'oha'o, Tutuila, American Samoa. I currently reside in unincorporated Seattle, as I've been told all the time, but the original land of the Muckleshoot people is where I live, work, and play. I moved here in June from Hawaii, lived, worked, and played there for a while. On the original lands of the Kanaka Maoli. Currently, I am the events, productions, and newly development manager partial development manager for Utopia Washington. My background artistically is in voice and classical music. I was an opera singer for a hot minute before jumping into a lot of community work, and specifically with Utopia Washington. My pronouns are he, him, his, but I proudly recognize as a mask fa'afafine. And yeah, I'm very happy to be here. I'm excited for this talanoa. I'm excited for this talk. And yeah, I'm happy to be here with all of you.
Well, Suzuz Ma'ase Lehuauakea, as well as Brandon, you both bring such a richness of experiences to how we think about art, how we think about expression, and how that relates to healing. And so my questions today concern how your work relates to acts of healing, acts of reclamation, and I just wanted to have a conversation about how your diverse artistic expressions relate to the Pasifika or Islander experience, and how you share in that experience with others through your art and expressions. And so my first question is, in what ways are Pasifika values represented in your artistic expressions? And what do you hope your expressions communicate about the Pacific Islander experience in the Pacific Northwest and beyond?
You can go first.
Okay. Awesome. So this question, when I received it first, kind of made me think a lot. So again, my background is in classical music, having a bachelor's and a master's in voice. This question really hit my heart because for a long time, I ignored a lot of my Pacific identity, not so much purposefully, but because my training is very much in a Western art form. One thing that it did do for me as I grew in my artistic expression and my artistry is that I realized the foundation of where my art lies is very much rooted in my culture. Pacific Islanders in general are very, from a Western point of view, artistic people, but really for us, it's an everyday thing. I had the chance of meeting Lehuauakea, and I'm like a huge fan of the work that she does, the work that they do, but historically, it's just a part of life for Hawaiians, for anyone who does that tapestry, and there's a lot of shared forms of it across the Pacific Islands. So for me, as a classical singer, I realized a lot of my Indigenous training was due to the fact that music has always been a part of life as well for myself and my culture as a Samoan. Growing up in church, growing up in youth groups, growing up in my family, I realized later on that I could express my Indigenous self and my Indigenous art in my Western art form. It wasn't something that I had to keep separate. And then also being queer, I realized I could also throw that in there as well. I think what I want to express and what I try to express about the Pacific Islander experience is that a lot of it, while especially as someone who recognizes themselves as a diasporic Pacific Islander now, even though I was born and raised back home, a lot of my lived experience is here on Turtle Island and away from my home. Is that like there's always a way to find your way back, and I'm learning that, especially working here at Utopia with these amazing trans women and fa'afafine who we're all away from home, and yet we find ways to connect ourselves back to our culture, and in our artistic expression are able to connect, in our living culture, and being able to continue these art forms and continue being able to be our Indigenous authentic selves, even though we're so far away from home. And I think that's a big thing for me too, is this idea of being diasporic, but also having just as strong a connection to my homeland and to my practices and protocols as those who are back home.
Wonderful. Thank you, Brandon.
Yeah, that's so well said. And I think the topic of diasporic communities up here in the Pacific Northwest is so critical to a contemporary Pacific Islander experience, because so many of us struggle with finding ourselves and finding connection and finding community. And once we find our community, everything else kind of seems to fall in place. At least that's how my experience was. It took me almost a decade of being up here in the Northwest to find my spot. But once I did, everything, so much healing on a radical internal spiritual level has happened. And my work as an artist, as you know, for my career has just kind of gone in line with that without even me trying too much. But in terms of values beyond making sure that you are contributing to a community, I think that goes hand in hand though with the idea of kuleana, which is it kind of roughly translates to responsibilities or one's tie to community and land and each other. And so that's something that I've really stepped into, and I'm still stepping into, because my kuleana is always changing and moving and flowing as I grow as a person. And I think, you know, because kuleana is such an integral part of Hawaiian culture, reclaiming something like kapa, which is, like you said, Brandon, like just part of everyday life, there's inherently a lot of kuleana and responsibilities that go along with that. So honoring where this work is coming from, honoring the stories that our patterns tell, because they're not just pretty graphics. I mean, they are beautiful, but they are so much deeper than that. These are intergenerational stories that I need to learn and respect and teach others to do the same through the work that I do. And so there's a lot of responsibility to uphold those aspects of these ways of working that aren't just mine. You know, it's different from, I think, making like an oil painting or taking photos, which are valid art forms in themselves, but this is something that goes back millennia, and I need to respect that as a contemporary artist while still honoring myself as someone who has a unique story, embodying all these strange and weird and beautiful intersections of my identity, being like a queer, Indigenous, diasporic Hawaiian here on native lands that are not my ancestral homelands. So there's so much to consider, but I think my artistic practice has allowed me to step into that more fully and more authentically and more honestly.
Wonderful. Oh, you both shared such invigorating responses to this first question. You have my mind just in several places. And I think that you beautifully captured not only the values of your different expressions, but what they mean to the larger community. And so speaking of connections and finding place, I'm so glad that you two have had the opportunity to connect with one another, and that shows just the value of community and finding your people. I've also had the wonderful opportunity to connect with Utopia at various Pride events in Washington and the Pacific Northwest, as well as through my close friend, Dr. Jeremiah Sadaraka. So I'm just really glad that when we talk and share, there's more connections that we can find with one another. You also both brought up how the art that is being produced is representative of real experiences. They're reflective of our observations of the world, of home. And I like how you both beautifully put how it's for the diasporic identity, a means of finding one's way back home. That was so powerful to me. And finding oneself within community and within connection, and doing so through artistic expressions. I'm so glad, Lehuauakea, that you brought up kuleana and defined it so specifically. I like how you said that it is a sense of responsibility that's forged in community, that shows connection to one another and to land, but that these responsibilities are shared. It's a recognition of individual experiences, but individual experiences as they relate to a larger collective experience. And I was just honestly reading about kuleana and how we have to be very careful, because words like kuleana, words like aina oftentimes are misconstrued, sometimes even appropriated and commodified. And so I like how you shared that these aren't just pretty pieces of work. Like, these aren't just images for consumption. These speak to real experiences. And Dr. Rebecca Hogue was gracious to share with me Remembering Our Intimacies by Jamaica Osorio. Yeah. So when you talked about Kuleana, I was like, oh my goodness, this is just what I was reading. And you did such a great job of addressing Kuleana and sharing about Kuleana in a way that I think needs to be shared and needs to be understood. So thank you both. The second question is, in what ways does your art respond to disparities and injuries specifically experienced by Pacific Islanders? You both talked about just the complexity of the experience of being Indigenous and being on land that is not your own. You talked about the complexities of the diasporic experience. And so I'm thinking about what concerns and violences have been imposed upon Pacific Islander bodies and identities, and how art functions as a space to address those disparities and injuries. So, anyone?
I guess I can start this one. That is such a deep and like hardcore question, like, because the first thing that comes to mind for me is the fact that colonization in the Pacific is still very real and ongoing. And it is blatantly apparent to people who live in these places or are tied ancestrally to these lands. Our lands have been bombed, poisoned, our water systems have been disrupted, stolen, our lands have been completely decimated from their natural state, and that goes hand in hand with the health and vitality of our people. So when our lands and waters are suffering, so are our people and our cultures and our languages. And so I think a lot of my work now is kind of shifting to this, the idea that it's time to take it all back, and do so unapologetically. And while I might make that look beautiful, it's really touching on some super deep and difficult themes in our histories, and oftentimes that are still ongoing today, like with the Red Hill water crisis, where the main aquifer on Oahu is currently being poisoned by jet fuel. And the United States colonial force of the Navy thinks that's okay. And so, you know, and that's just one example, right? Like, it goes throughout the entire Pacific. And so art is a really good way, I think, of making these stories available to people who are not directly experiencing them, and sharing them in a way that might be more accessible than just trying to talk to people one-on-one. You know, I think it broadening the approach to many different ways of addressing these issues is really helpful, at least for me. And sometimes the art can speak better than words can. Beyond that, though, I think I'll also mention like the diaspora again, because so much of us have been pushed to other places outside of our homelands, not by choice, but because of these colonial forces who make our lands inhospitable. Bikini Atoll, for example, or like in my home in Hawaii, where the median home price is about $1 million right now, and that's just not accessible to so many of us Native Hawaiians, where we make up more than half of the homeless population there, in our own ancestral homelands. Like, and that is so backwards to me. And so, you know, I think there's so many different ways of expressing identity, expressing the intersections that we occupy and the crossroads that kind of cross through us. And I just happen to be part of that diasporic community where I'm kind of occupying two and even more different worlds, like straddled across the ocean. And like Brandon, I'm also Pasifika and Asian. So like I'm also Japanese, and that's played a really big part in my upbringing and my life. And so I think honoring those stories as well, instead of trying to just pigeonhole myself into one category, has made me step more fully into who I am as an individual, and appreciate all the different people that literally sailed across oceans for me to be here today in this body. And I think that's pretty special, and it can be complicated, but it's also really beautiful. And there's a lot of people who share similar experiences.
I've always heard in like different discussions, like it's always boring to say, oh, I resonate with that, because it's like, well, what are you adding? Like a lot of what Lehuauakea spoke on, a lot of that truth, I think is a lived experience for so many Pacific Islanders. But like specifically, I resonated with how my art has also taken a shift, part of a backseat, but also a shift in that I think the biggest thing for me right now, especially with my work here at Utopia, is the idea of visibility. Lehuauakea spoke on it a bit as well, in that growing up, I wasn't really confident in my identity. I knew how to shape shift and make it work growing up, in church, in family, in my community. I think now moving forward, I've done a lot more of self-expression in my artistic ability, especially as a singer, in incorporating my culture and my queer identity. Going back to visibility, that's for me has been one of the biggest things that has saved me. I think that that's a really important and sometimes overlooked aspect of artistic expression, is simple visibility that can go a long way. I'm new to identifying as a Fa'afafine. If you asked me 5-10 years ago if I would have ever said that I was a Fa'afafine, I would have scoffed and laughed and not really understood why anyone would think someone who's mask presenting would identify as that. But I think that one thing, especially with disparity and injury, is that this idea of third gender within our community has been a pillar in a lot of Pacific Islander communities since the beginning of time, if not further. A lot of those lived experiences continue to carry our cultural practices and our protocols, and especially our artistic expressions. And so I think that in my shift here and my work here, that lived experience has been the biggest, I guess, lifesaver for me in how I choose to express myself now, in being able to openly and unapologetically identify as a mask presenting Fa'afafine who, can do a lot of things. And I think that I didn't have a lot of that growing up because I didn't identify with a lot of the Fa'afafine community because of my lack of knowledge and my lack of connection, my lack of experience with that community. And now that word coming to encompass so much of a diverse identity within that word alone. And that goes for a lot of the other quote unquote third gender identifying words, Akvahine, Fa'afafine, Mahu, Leiti, like coming into this and into this work, but also bringing my art and my form of expression into it has done a lot for myself. And so I know that it can do a lot for the younger Brandons and the younger Taffys and the younger Dells and the younger Lehuauakeas out there who have this unique experience of being diasporic and not knowing. Lehuauakea spoke about occupying multiple circles, multiple worlds, and I love that expression a lot. I think there's a lot more of our own people who have that lived experience, and something as simple as visibility and being able to see someone like yourself thriving and being unapologetic about their expression goes a long way, and really helps with the health of our community, because again, a lot of the cultural practitioners and those who carry on our culture are of this gender, are of this unique lived experience, and I don't think that that's spoken of enough. I'm not saying that our culture should center around us, but I do think that it is important to acknowledge that we exist and that we're doing a lot for the community, and that a lot of the hatred and ignorance that is, again, these disparities and these injuries have come from Western influence and outside influence, and that indigenously our existence has always been accepted, has always been respected, and it plays a huge part in the evolution and the growth of our communities and our practices and our protocols. And so like and a lot of this is new to me too, and I'm trying to encompass this a lot in my work, and reminding myself that it's more than just, you know, early in my art form, it was very much a me, like I'm going to be the star, I'm on stage alone, the pianist doesn't matter, it's all about me. And now, you know, I've taken this mental and physical shift in that my art is more than just me, it's us, all of us. And I think that's, so again, yeah, like I'm over explaining the importance of visibility and being able to unapologetically be yourself, to then be that shining light or that pillar, that connection for a lot of the other folks in our community who don't have that, especially out here. The work that Lehuauakea is doing out here, and the work that a lot of our Pacific Islander organizations are doing to support artists like themselves, and continue to perpetuate our practices. It goes a lot for our diasporic communities, but also helps to expand where we've come from, and builds those connections to our family members and our cousins and all of our Ainga back home as well. Yeah, I think I answered the question. I'm going to stop rambling now.
You both, again, have given me so much to think about, as I'm sure the audience is feeling as well. I really appreciate you calling out specifically what these disparities and injuries are, colonization, that it is real, that it is ongoing, and heteropatriarchy, and these different systems of power bearing upon Pacific Islander bodies in very specific ways is something that needs to be called out and addressed. So I just want to say my gratitude to you both for being very clear about the different forces that bear upon the Pacific Islander experiences, and how art is a transcendent medium that increases visibility, allows opportunity to express intersectional experiences. And also, Brandon, you mentioned that your art was a lifesaver. And I think that that's an important point. Not only is it for visibility and expression, but the means of creating and the means of sharing something in community is in itself a life-saving and life-giving endeavor. And so that relates to the next question about, in what ways does your art move toward healing, both collective and personal? You both touched on this question a little bit when we talked about the specific injuries and disparities, but and this is really meaningful and specific to my own experiences about how is it that we heal from these things. Is healing a necessary part of the experience? If so, does art provide a means for that type of healing? And what does this healing look like within ourselves, among our communities, and for the larger Pacific Islander experience?
I'll go for this question. Like the last one, and like who has said about the last question, this is a really deep question as well. There's so much that can be said. I'll start personally. My art has always been healing for myself because I think one identifying marker that a lot of artists can say is that going into artistic expression, first and foremost, the first step was because it was a self-healing process. Music has always been something that has soothed me, and it has always been something that I've had a weird connection to. Music has always been in my life, but I don't come from one of those like insanely musical families. All of my family members sing in choir and in church, and I always grew up around music, but I've had this weird connection to music ever since I was little, and so it has always been a healing process for me. Even more so now, going back to the concept of I find myself existing within these multiple worlds and multiple circles, like Lehuauakea said, and the transformation and the growth of my art because of those lived experiences and because of all of those intersections has continued to help heal the additional identities that I've come to proudly identify within. And so personally, it has always been healing, and it's continued to be a healing process. I hope it never stops being a healing process for myself. There have been moments where I have had to step away from music. I did that most recently with my shift here to Washington and to Utopia, Washington, focusing very strongly on serving community, but also sort of giving myself time to wrestle with my identity and accept the fullness of myself. And in doing so, being surrounded again by these amazing and these powerful trans women, Fa'afafine, and Asian Pacific Islanders in my organization, it's, where's my train of thought? Going back to the idea of I had this thought of like, the Western eyes see our art and our protocols and our practices as art. And we see it as just everyday life as, oh, well, when this happens, that happens. And when that happens, this happens. And, you know, when church gatherings happen, whatever it is in our cultural life that happens, these art forms come into play whenever necessary, whenever needed. And I think the biggest thing for me has been that having that point of view and that analysis on, yes, I'm an artist, but also this is so much more of me than I really ever thought. It is both something that I'm learning, but it's something that's innately within me. As a Fa'afafine, as a singer, as a Samoan Chinese person, having all of these identities, share this connection to my art, but also being able to share that connection to others, and what Utopia Washington does, and what our third gender queer identifying artists in Pasifika do to be able to bridge connections to others and really building bridges for all of our people to walk back and forth on, to be able to continue these connections and to make these pathways back to who we are as people, which is not an easy thing to do. And it is selfless work, but it is work that needs to be done. And really it heals on both ends, on who it's offered to and who's creating it. And so there's a lot of healing that needs to be done within our communities. We could go on for 2 hours listing the ways in which we have been harmed, both internally and externally. But a lot of the ways that we create, the way that I sing, and that the way that Lehuauakea creates these beautiful, monumental, historically connecting pieces of art and work. And in Hawaiian, it's called correct me, Lehuauakea. What is the in Samoan it's called siapo, but I'm trying to make all the other words. In Hawaiian, it's called,
there's like natu, there's masi.
Yeah, and so
we call it kappa. We like our kids.
Yes, yeah, and so like really, like over explaining, like in creating the art form, the creation of these art forms in itself is healing. But it's a simple way of doing so much because we carry so much of these other identities and how we work in all these other circles, and in bringing all of that into the art form and the artwork and this creating process, that in itself creates so many different, again, bridges to healing in so many different ways. Yeah.
I'm just gonna say I resonate with that. But like for real, because you touched on so many themes that I've also experienced myself, and challenges that I've had to address on my own path to healing within my own practice and just in my personal life. And as a kappa maker and part of this younger generation of people who are bringing this back, you know, a lot of the kappa makers that I know are 40 and older, and being under 30 is, you know, it carries a level of responsibility for yourself, for your family, for your community, to like, it really puts things into perspective. Like, how do you see this work carrying on, and how do you see that being of service and in a healing way to your community? And in doing that has, like you said, Brandon, like it's been so healing for me. The healing goes both ways. And it's allowed me to tap into so many parts of myself that I either ignored or kind of forgot about for a long time, trying to just assimilate, unfortunately, into colonizer culture up here. You know, I think when I moved up here to the Pacific Northwest, I was 13 or 14. And I was just starting high school. It was like at a really critical turning point in my life, starting at a new school, being a teenager, and moving across the ocean to a completely different place. It really took its toll on me and my spirit. And I look back at that time over 10 years ago now and think about how amazing it would have been to have an example like myself, or someone who is doing similar work, just to look up to and be like, okay, yeah, I can be myself, and I can be successful, and I can, you know, fit in by not fitting in. You know, I don't have to fit into this cookie cutter image of what it means to be alive as a person. And I think there's so many different pressures that we have as Pasifika people to fit into certain boxes, right? And that's not just like from today's culture, but culture dating back to our grandparents, like what they faced when there was the first contact with the outside world, you know, like there are so many pressures with religion, spirituality, clothing styles, tattooing, how we presented ourselves, and that goes hand in hand also with gender expression and sexuality. And so, like I said earlier, like there's all these intersections of healing that need to be addressed, and it's not going to happen overnight or with one generation. Like it's going to be ongoing, but being able to step into these positions today, to start that process, I think is really powerful, and it's an honor, truly. And I think also just taking the role as an artist and a cultural practitioner and seeing where these two roles kind of can blend together is really special, because in my experience, it's allowed me to use my platform to share and create space for others to do the same, which I think is just the most beautiful thing. And it wasn't something that I initially set out to do, because I didn't know how to do it at first. I was still the one seeking out those spaces. But now that I'm on the other end of that and being able to provide that for people, especially like the kids in our community, is just, it, you know, it leaves me at a loss for words. It's just amazing. And I'm thinking back to October, when I had a bunch of kappa up at a gallery in Portland, Oregon, and my hula community, my teacher, who also happens to be from the same town I'm from, and she came with several of our other aunties and younger kids, from like 5 years old all the way up until like teenagers from the halau. And they like it was just like this whole troop of love that like walked into the gallery for one of my artist talks. And at the end of that, there was a Q&A period where, you know, audience could pose questions to myself and the other artists there. And my teacher was one of the first to ask, or, you know, to raise her hand. And she just was so overwhelmed with emotion. She was just, you know, brought to tears because she had said that, you know, it was just so powerful for her to see someone younger doing this work so far away from home, but creating a space for others to be seen and heard, and for our community to be held, and for our younger kids to see themselves represented in such a positive way, where otherwise we just have things like tourism ads and Moana, you know, and like, you know, not gonna lie, I do like the film Moana because there are kapa makers like represented in like a split second in the movie, but you know, it's important to have real life representations of who we are in different expressions of what that is to be a contemporary Pasifika individual. And so, you know, just the same, it's healing on both ends, and I just hope to be able to continue doing that with my work.
Thank you so much for sharing your personal experiences in relation to this question. I like that you both talked about how healing is a process and art is part of that process. But because there continues to be injury and disparity, there is much healing to be done. And so that resonated with me, to use the language that we've all been sharing, that resonated with me. But also I think you both did such an impeccable job of describing how art for you is both internal and external. This process of creating is creating something within oneself as well as sharing it outward. The word carries was also something that stood out to me in both of your contributions. And so I was writing this down as you all were talking, and I wrote that art carries meaning, connection, and history, but it also carries on. Because something I really admire in both of you is that you're looking at the generational impact of the work that you do, saying, I want this to go forward, to carry forward, or as Brandon so beautifully put, I want this to be a bridge and a pathway that multiple people can walk back and forth to and from, but also continuing to think about who is art being offered to, who is creating it. And so I really like this, I guess, this metaphor of carrying, that art carries meaning, that art carries a sense of self, art carries history and the our ancestors, but carries all of these things forward into the future. So thank you all for sharing that profound metaphor for how we can think about art and the capacity it has for connecting. As you were both talking, you were also sharing about, while there are benefits, there are also limits. Brandon, you talked about, you know, sometimes this, while it's healing, there was time when I had to take some space and take some time to wrestle with my own identity. And Lehuauakea, you talked about, while art provides the benefits of visibility and representation, there are also limits to that representation. While it can be captivating, it doesn't necessarily encapsulate a full experience. And you talked about Moana. I'm happy that they showed kapa makers, but also it was like a split second. So that kind of relates to my final question is, which is, what are the benefits of expressing oneself in community through a variety of forms, modes, and mediums? You talked about connection, you talked about representation, you talked about reconciling different intersectional experiences, but I'm also interested in maybe some of the limits, exploring a little bit more of the limits that you discussed. Whether it's with regard to representation, whether it's with regard to misrepresentations, or maybe even the, as we talked about earlier, just appropriation, commodification, or consumption of art without recognizing the true real value. So can you both speak to that a little bit more?
Do you want to go first or do you want me to go first?
Up to you.
I'll just like, I guess I'll just say like, I think just the way that I was raised and like my own upbringing, I have a hard time to understand hard limits. And maybe that's just like my genetic stubbornness or like my built-in resilience as like a Pacific Islander, and maybe it's both. But I think instead of maybe the word limit, for me at least, I'll use the word challenges or obstacles to overcome. Because there are so many times where I thought there was a limit, and then a year later, I'm doing what I thought was impossible pretty much. And I know I'm not the only one who has that kind of experience. It's definitely not going to be easy though to do this kind of work. And I think in terms of expressions, there's as many different expressions of creating and embodying these forms of healing as there are individuals set on this path. So essentially limitless. But that doesn't mean that it's going to be an easy ride, you know? And I think as a kappa maker, what I've done to kind of address these challenges is look to the past in order to move forward and have a better understanding of where I am in my community present moment. And we do that a lot through storytelling, through mo'olelo, and looking at the mo'olelo through metaphor, because our stories span back so many generations, literally millennia, but they are just as relevant today as they were when they were first told. And I think that in itself tells just how much we as Kanaka Maoli and like Pacific Islanders are so you know, on the grind about breaking through these barriers and these imposed limits and things that might seem impossible. I mean, our ancestors literally crossed thousands of miles of ocean using just the currents, the seabirds, the winds, the stars, and that seemed impossible to the Westerners who arrived on our shores using instruments like compasses. And so I think limits are just in the mind, you know, but there are very real challenges that we do deal with, like appropriation, like commodification. And as an artist, that's something that we deal with all the time, being exoticized and personified as like this, I don't know, this whole trope of what it means to be an islander. And, you know, it's not easy, but I think this is at least just my way of tackling those stereotypes and those challenges and making spaces for other people to do the same.
So I after hearing you reiterate this question, I like have like a newfound thought that I'm like pondering. I want to like dive into that. But for the first part of the question, I think, you know, there are so many benefits of expressing yourself in your community. First and foremost, it adds, you do nothing but add to the community, and you add to the culture, and you add to our lived experience and our history. Through a variety of forms, modes, and mediums, I think the beauty in being Pacific Islander, and something that I'm really proud of, and also something that I've come to really embody, especially again here at Utopia with these amazing and beautiful Fa'afafine and trans women, is that Pacific Islanders have always been not only multitaskers, but multi-talented. We embody multiple art forms, and we have multiple art forms that one way or the other we come to learn all the time. Lehuauakea doesn't only make kapa, she makes amazing body jewelry that like embodies these Hawaiian designs and these Hawaiian motifs that I think are just so beautiful. And there's, as far as limits, I agree with Lehuauakea. I don't think there are any. It's a blessing to be a Pacific Islander. I'm not going to apologize for that. But you know, again, there's a responsibility that also comes on the other half of, you know, carrying on these traditions and these protocols and these practices, and being able to be unapologetically yourself and in your expression. I think the only limits to these expressions are, and they're not so much limits, but they're just harmful, is commodification of our culture and our practices. And you know, key example, a lot of our designs and that have historic and deep meaning being carried and tattooed on white people. Don't understand it. I don't care to go into that topic of discussion, but it's a real thing. Moana is also a huge example. You know, they did some things right, they did some things not right. I am always trying to be the optimistic person in that, you know, a lot of our children can see themselves on the big screen now, which is beautiful. But they can also inform themselves and gain connection to their culture through the people on the ground doing the real work, like Lehuauakea, like all of our community organizers who are working to build these bridges to really give true connection to culture. I don't think there are any limits, and there shouldn't be. I think there's always going to be pushback on our self-expression and our abilities to being so damn talented. But you know, that comes with the, I think that comes with the territory. And I think another slight limit is our own community members, holding our own community members back. I think a lot of that needs to stop, both intergenerational, but also from the het cis community towards the third gender, non-binary identifying community members within our Pasifika groups. And but again, something that, like, I think Lehuauakea spoke on when she started answering the question was, we're resilient people and we're always going to be. And I think a lot of that resilience is carried on by our artists, by our cultural practitioners who, you know, just again, it comes with the territory that we walk in these different worlds and these different circles, and carrying those experiences in our expression, in our way of telling our stories, will only help to amplify who we are indigenously and coming into this modern world. You know, who we are 100 years ago is not who we were 1,000 years ago. And we're constantly evolving. And I think there needs to be a larger, broader mindset of accepting that change and that growth within our community, but also being able to safeguard ourselves and keep our own communities and our larger thoughts positive and peaceful, but also uplifting towards our own. But yeah, I don't think there are limits, and if there are, bring them on. But it's a humbling thing, and I'm sure anyone from any culture can say this about their own culture. You know, you should be proud of who you are and who you come from and where you come from, and there's nothing wrong with you know, holding your head up high because you are who you are, and you carry a lot of history. And like Lehuauakea said, hundreds of people had to come together and survive and persevere for us to be who we are today. And I think that, like, keeping that mentality behind what we do just helps you know, keep us going, because the fatigue is real sometimes. But like Lehuauakea said, and like I've experienced myself, we come to these stops and these points where we're like, can I go on? Am I able to do more? And lo and behold, we find the answers and we keep going. And you know, that's the beauty in being Pacific Islander. And but also, you know, I just unbiased, but also like being queer and being indigenously queer is also like, it's a talent. So I'm also not gonna apologize for that. Like, I'm sorry, I'm not sorry, but like all of this comes into like, it's, you know, it's daunting sometimes, but it's also like, you know, sometimes you just have to dust your own shoulder off and like realize how awesome you are. And then using that to continue to express yourself in your art and in your culture. And yeah.
Beautiful. Thank you both so much. I am so moved by what you shared. And I think that that's the perfect note to conclude our conversation on, just an emphasis on resilience. I like how you confronted this word limits, and you both shared about while this isn't to undermine the challenges and the obstacles that Pacific Islander people face, this isn't to say that there isn't that this isn't to say that there isn't going to be resilience. This means that in the same way that Pacific Islander people have a history of change and growth, you carry that into the future through your artistic expressions, through the work you do in the community. And I just wanted to celebrate that work, celebrate the perspectives that you hold, the resilience that has been forged through the generations, through your histories and your experiences. And I just want to express my gratitude to you both for all the good work that you do for the community. Thank you for this conversation. Thank you for being you, for being unapologetically you. So thank you both so much.
Thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, mahalo nui loa.
Thank you guys so much. I really appreciate this very, just unapologetic and resonating conversation. And before we wrap up, I just wanted to provide some space for any final thoughts, anything that might have come up that you just didn't have a chance to say yet. Yeah, I just wanted to provide that space. Lehuauakea, did you have anything that you wanted to wrap up with? Totally fine if not too. Brandon, did you have anything that you wanted to wrap up with?
Yeah, I didn't realize how much I needed this until this just happened. This I am hopeful that this is going to be healing for a lot of folks. Again, this is healing for me. We just went over this. I hope this is as healing for others as this was for myself. It's, you know, it brings into perspective like these discussions need to be had more and need to be more common, I think, to be able to, you know, reinvigorate, but also just invigorate our community members and the work that we're doing, the work that we're all doing. So again, just a lot of gratitude to all of you for this. I have learned so much, but I am also just really humbled by this experience in the Talanoa, and it's definitely going to fuel a lot of my work. I'm excited to share this with as many people as I can. And I'm excited for everyone who's going to see this and what they can take away from this, because there's there was a lot of truth that was thrown out there that from everyone that I am very grateful for. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, Brandon. And finally, our wonderful moderator or facilitator, Tavi, do you have any closing thoughts that you wanted to finish out with?
I just want to express my gratitude to you both for your flexibility over the break, for your understanding. And I am just so personally touched and so moved. And this was so significant to my own healing. So thank you, Sister Swasi.
Yeah, again, it is like the greatest honor of my job to be able to be in communication with people like you, and just even when I'm in the background, just watch sort of this generative conversation firsthand is truly an honor for me to be a part of. And yeah, finally, I just wanted to thank our listeners and viewers for tuning in and supporting our work. To view more recorded discussions and events like this one, please check out our Humanities Washington YouTube page. You can also find information on all of our programming at humanities.org. Thank you so much.